Welcome back, everyone, to our weekly discussion of the Haftara. And this week we have a real treat, not because the Haftara is so inspiring, it raises more questions than it answers, but it's written in clear Hebrew, it's accessible, it's a story that most of us know, and we don't need to spend much time talking about the connection between the Haftara and the Parsha. There is no connection between the Haftara and the Parsha. There is, however, a connection between the Haftara and the Maftir, right? We're on Pasha Zakhor, Shabbat Zakhor, Haman Ha'agagi, a direct descendant of Agag Melech Amalek, who meets his end in this week's Parsha, is killed. The whole mitzvah of Zechirat, of Mechiyat Amalek, and Zakhor Masha Asher Asalach Amalek, but that's the Haftara. Not much doubt about that. And so why don't we just dive right in? And the first issue, it seems to me, it's hard to deal with the whole story of Amalek without taking a step back and asking ourselves about the morality of the mitzvah. Right now, the truth is the Haftara doesn't really address the morality, at least not directly. But it's kind of hiding in plain sight. We do not see ourselves as being bloodthirsty, as being people who take revenge for no reason. Nekama is also in the Torah. This is the Raisa. And yeah, we have Timched Zech Amalek Mitach Hashamayim Lo Tishkach. Or I could pick a pasuk from this week's Haftara, which is really difficult to read. Says Shmuel to Shaul, Ata Lech V'hi Kitat Amalek V'hacharamtem et Kol Asher Lo V'lo Tachmol Olav. No mercy. V'heimata Me'ish Ad Isha, men and women, me'olel v'ad yonei, right? The infants, mishor v'ad chamor, mishor v'ad seh, migamal v'ad chamor. Everything, everyone, total extermination, total obliteration. And for everybody, it's hard to get through what it seems like to imply, right? And God's commandment to Shaul through Shmuel could not have been any clearer, and yet it didn't work, right? Shaul did not carry out the mission, at least not to its conclusion. He had mercy on the animals. And the first question that comes to mind is, if it's immoral, why didn't Shaul say something? Why didn't he object? If he had a problem with the morality of the mitzvah, why didn't he say something? It's a fascinating Gemara in Yuma Chaf Beis Amud Beis, which says, in fact, he did object. Says the Gemara, when God said to Shaul, wipe out Amalek, Amar, Shaul answers him, Uma nefesh achat amra Torah, have egla arufa. Torah has a whole parshiah on what happens if you find a body and you don't know whose it is, and it's dead, and you need to find out who it is. There's a whole process. So it says, if you do that for one unknown body in the street, wouldn't God care about wiping out all these people from Amalek? And then he continues, let's say that the men deserve to be killed. What did the animals do wrong? Let's say the grown-ups sin. What did the children do? Okay, it seems like good questions. And then unbelievably, says the Gemara, Baskol comes out. Yatsa Baskol V'amra, my favorite pasuk, Al Tehit Tzadik Harbe. Don't be such a big tzaddik. And the Gemara continues. Ubishashem Halo Shaul L'Doeg, Sov Ato Ufegaba Kohanim. Later on, when Shaul wipes out the Nov Ir HaKohanim, a terrible, terrible sin, the same Baskol calls out Yatzos Baskol V'Amrlo, end of that pasuk, V'al Tir Shaharbe. Don't be such a big tzaddik, but don't be such a big Rasha either. You who claim to be bothered by the morality of exterminating Amalek, you exterminated the city of tzaddikim. It was a terrible, terrible mistake. Now, does this Gemara mean that we can't question HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not question, God forbid, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's authority, but question the rationale for mitzvahs and ask hard questions like that? I think the answer is no. But I think we have to look deep in our hearts and ask ourselves, what's bothering us? Would we do it for ourselves but not for HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Let's take a really easy example, right? God says, should I hide from Abraham that which I'm going to do? Right? God is about to wipe out Sodom. So he tells Abraham, I'm about to wipe out Sodom. And Abraham says, wait, don't do it. What if there's 50 people? What if there's 45, 40, 30, 20, 10? Abraham engages in a negotiation, a protracted negotiation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu over Sodom. And yet, and the Medrash points this out, when God says to him, take Yitzchak, right? Bring Yitzchak, bring the Akedah, sacrifice Yitzchak to me, Abraham doesn't say a word. And the Medrash says the difference is, with respect to the Akedah, there was a correct, direct, clear, unambiguous command of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There was no wiggle room. God didn't give Abraham any wiggle room. With respect to Sodom, the sense you get is that God wanted Abraham to do exactly what he did. He wanted to be questioned. He wanted Abraham to argue with him. And that's exactly what Abraham did. And so the distinction becomes, when God gives us a mitzvah, but it's not a direct mitzvah, when we understand the value from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have every right and maybe obligation to think about it, to question it, to see how it fits in our lives. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a direct command, even a direct command that seems absolutely unexplainable or absolutely immoral, our obligation is to fulfill that command directly and immediately, something that Shaul failed at. Okay. Now, but we come back to the mitzvah of wiping out Amalek. And the truth is, it's much more of a theoretical mitzvah, certainly bisman hazeh, than it is practical, right? The Gemara says that Sancheirav bilbel kol ha'amim, Sancheirav came and pulled the Yosef. What did Yosef do in Mitzrayim? He moved the people from this town to that town, and people from that town to this town. Sancheirav did that with the countries in the Middle East. He moved the Egyptians to Syria, and Syrians to Iraq, and Iraq to Iran, and over again. And therefore, Lamaisa, if somebody wants to convert bisman hazeh and identifies himself as coming from Amalek, we don't believe him. Because there is no genetic Amalek anymore. Kol the parish, miruba parish, says the Gemara, right? Our assumption is that Goyim are just Goyim. They're not from a particular land. They're not from a particular people. And so we would accept a ger bisman hazeh from Amalek. And that leads me to something I probably shouldn't say, but we're all friends and we're talking anyway about the Haftara. The sense I get is that it's much more, even back then, it was much more theoretical halacha, in that in some way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants there to be an Amalek in the world. And how would that work? Well, it seems to me we had plenty of opportunities to wipe out Amalek. Let's just go back to the maftir of this week. Yoshua, yes, Amalek gets all the bad things about Amalek, but then Yoshua comes and Moshe is standing on the mountain and he raises his hands and we're winning the war. And so why is it okay that Vayachalosh Yehoshua et Amalek et Amalek fi Charev? Yoshua weakened them. Why didn't Yoshua just wipe them out? Right? Why is it that Shmuel tells Shaul, kill them? And Yoshua is not told that. So I've always suspected that the existence of Amalek and the corresponding mitzvah to wipe them out points out to us and teaches us a significant lesson, and that is that there is absolute evil in the world. Not just the lack of good. Absolute evil. And it has to be exterminated. And it has to be exterminated by us, by the good guys. It's not okay to just say, well, Amalek, they were misunderstood as children, their parents treated them badly, if we just understood them better. No. They represent evil in the world, and evil has to be wiped out. That's difficult for us to assimilate. It's a difficult fact, but it is the fact. It's the fact literally and figuratively, right? We can't make peace with these people. We have to wipe them out. And that's why we have this strange mitzvah, right? The strange mitzvah is to remember to wipe out Amalek, so then you won't remember him anymore, right? You're not allowed to remember Amalek. How do you do that? By wiping them out. It's very confusing. But it's not just the absence of good in the world. It's the existence of evil. It's a sobering fact, but it's a fact that we have to live with. Now, I'm not smart enough to tell you who Amalek is, Bisman Hazah. The Rav famously said that in the 30s, the capital of Amalek was in Berlin. In the 40s, Amalek moved to Russia, and the capital of Amalek was Stalingrad. Where's Amalek nowadays? Is it in Tehran? Is it in Gaza? I don't know. But I know that the mitzvah of Amalek makes the point that there is evil in the world, and we should not ignore that evil, and we should not make our peace with that evil. We have to wipe it out. And just knowing that is significant in terms of the actual mitzvah. And I should just point out also, finally, the famous Shitas HaRambam is that you have to sue for peace even with Amalek. And an Amalekite who takes on the Zayin Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, L'Shem Shamayim, does not have the mitzvah of Timched Zech Amalek. You don't have to wipe him out, and such a person can live. Okay, that's the first point I wanted to make about the mitzvah of wiping out Amalek. And now to the actual story of the Haftara, which the main point is really the fall of Shaul as the Melech Yisrael, and eventually, the Malchus of David taking over. Now, here we can ask two questions. The first is, it's well known that David HaMelech sinned many, many times in Tanakh, and he was always forgiven for his sin. And sometimes you think to yourself, it seems unfair to Shaul. He sinned once. Why wasn't he forgiven? Why was God so harsh with Shaul and so forgiving with respect to David? And the second question is, Shaul's sin, is it that bad? Yes, he didn't wipe out the sheep. Is it so bad to bring it as a carbon to God? Those are the two questions. So let's just start with what I think is the key pasuk, right? Vayomer Shmuel, Halo im katon ata beinecha. Shmuel says to Shaul, you may not think you're so great. However, Rosh Shivtei Yisrael ata vayimshachacha Hashem l'melech al Yisrael. You're the anointed one. You're not just any other king. You're the first king ever of Am Yisrael. You're setting a level and a perspective and a level of obedience to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that everybody's going to follow. Okay, now, when Shmuel challenged Shaul for not following God's commandments, Shaul's answer was a simple one. Vayomer Shaul, me'amaleki hevium, asher chamal ha'am al meitav atzon v'habakar, l'man zvach la'adonai elecha v'eta yoseh hecheramnu. Right, when Shmuel says to Shaul, what's the mekol atzon that I'm hearing? Right, Shaul says, well, the people wanted it. And there's no reason to doubt him. The people did want it. He was being responsive to the will of the people. But that's exactly the problem. When God gives you a direct command, especially a direct command to exterminate Amalek, the people don't exist and their will doesn't exist. His failure wasn't just a weakness in him, it was a failure as the leader. Right? David HaMelech sinned because of personal weakness. But those sins didn't have anything to do with being the Melech. But Shaul's sin was exactly in how he viewed his rule. Shaul wanted the people to approve of him, and he cared what the street thought. Right? David HaMelech didn't. And therefore, God regrets having appointed Shaul HaMelech as the king. Nichamti ki himlachti Shaul LaMelech. Literally, now, we're not going to get into the question of what's meant for God to regret. But whatever it means, and the word does come up many, many times, including after the Mabul and other places, right? It means that at some level, the way things played out was not the way God intended them to be. And therefore, God regrets having appointed Shaul as king, and Shaul has to be replaced by David. The second major difference is not really the sin itself, but the response to the sin. Right? As we know from the narratives later on, and also from Sefer Tehillim, David HaMelech was a Baal Tshuva. When he sinned and he realized it, he apologized immediately. He regretted it deeply. When Gad Hanavi tells him about the Kivsa Harash, that mashal, and David immediately says, Ani Haish, I've sinned. I'm the person who took the man's only sheep. I should never have done it. God has no choice but to forgive him because it's immediate and it's real. There's no hesitation. There's no excuses. It's just a complete, authentic acknowledgement of failure, and God responds to that. Right? And every sin that David has in Tanakh, when he recognizes it, when the Navi points out to him what his sin is, he immediately comes clean and admits it and doesn't do it again. But not Shaul. Shaul is into excuses. Yeah, he eventually says, Vayom Shaul al Shmuel, Chatati, ki avarti et pi Adonai ve'et dvarecha, ki yareti et ha'am va'eshma b'kolam. But that's about 15 psukim after he should have admitted it. Instead of explaining the situation and why he did what he did and the people wanted this and that, Shaul should have David HaMelech would have just admitted it, that it was a mistake. When I look back, I look at it, I see God commanded me directly to wipe out everything, including the cattle. Maybe I understand it, maybe I don't. Doesn't matter. I'm sorry. But Shaul doesn't do that. And Shaul keeps using the reasons. And even when he admits it, yeah, it's because of the people. So his tshuva is too late. Tshuva must be done at the proper time. And if you can't do it at the proper time in the proper circumstances, you don't get to be Melech Yisrael. And, we think to ourselves, just because most of us are David HaMelech fans, not that it's a binary, black and white question, but Shmuel is really hurt by the whole story, right? When God comes to Shmuel and he tells him that Shaul has sinned, he's distraught. Here's the story. Here's what Shaul. Vayidva Hashem al Shmuel lemor. Nichamti himlachti et Shaul melech ki shav me'acharai ve'dvarai lo heikim vayicha lishmuel vayizak el Adonai kol halayla. This isn't a small thing. Shmuel anointed Shaul. He was loyal to him and he wanted him to be successful. It's really horrible that he's not. And we overlook the fact that Shmuel was really devastated by it. And after the Haftara, right, you have Vayelech Shmuel haramata v'Shaul olel beito yivat Shaul v'lo yosaf Shmuel lirot et Shaul ad yom moto ki hitabel Shmuel el Shaul v'Adonai nicham ki himlich et Shaul al Yisrael. The sense you get is both Shmuel and to some level Kiviyachal HaKadosh Baruch Hu are so disappointed that it didn't work out. They wanted it to work out and it didn't, and they felt responsible. Okay, that's the main point in the Haftara. Two small points, and there's so many we could talk about, but two small points that I feel like I have to point out. There's a strange event. After Shaul, quote unquote, apologizes, then you have the pasuk of Atas sanad chatati v'shuv imi ve'eshtachavel ladonai. Shaul seems completely focused on the need for Shmuel to join him in public sacrifices to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So even the idea of public sacrifices, after the war and celebrations, it's not something you really see with David HaMelech. But the focus of Shaul on kavod and how he wants Shmuel to come with him, right? And that's the scene where Shmuel turns away and Shaul grabs him and he rips his garment, and Shmuel says, Karam Amachut, God, just like you ripped my coat, God has ripped the kingdom of Israel from you, right? All this happens because Shaul is obsessed with having Shmuel appear with him. And it seems, again, to me, that it's a failing of Shaul. His public status was so important to him, right? The people's desire was so important to him, and him to be seen as being supported by Shmuel was so critical that even the apology that he apologizes at the end of the story, you have to question the sincerity, since the whole purpose is V'shuvi mi v'eshtachva l'Hashem. Really what I'm focused on is I want you to come with me and bring karbanot to Hashem, and the people will see us together, and that will raise how that will raise in the eyes of the people how they see me. Okay, that's one point. The second point is the end of the Haftarah, when Shmuel kills Agag Melech Amalek. Right? There's a sense of bloodthirstiness to it, but there's also a sense of you deserve it. Right? There's a sense that the people felt, not the people, Agag felt, okay, now's the time for negotiation. They left me alive because they're going to reach some kind of peace treaty with me. And the Psukim say, Vayomer Shmuel, Hagishu Elayat Agag Melech Amalek, Vayelech Elav Agag Ma'adanot, Vayomer Agag Achen Sar Mar Hamavet. Agag is convinced, I'm not going to be killed anymore. This is when we negotiate. Vayomer Shmuel, Kashesh Shikila Nashim Chabecha, Kain Tishgal Mi Nashim Imecha, Vayishasef Shmuel et Agag Lifnei Adonai Bagilgal. Vayishasef, he beheads him in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the sense you get is, there is a feeling that Shmuel sees Agag the way we see Hitler, the way we see Sinwar, or the way we see Arafat. He sees him as an evil person, but he's doing it Lifnei Hashem. He's aware of the fact that there's a tzivui from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to wipe out Amalek, and that applies both to the anonymous soldiers and to the person who he would have known politically, and he would have known militarily, and he would have known as the king of Agag. He must be beheaded Lifnei Hashem. That's the key of the mitzvah. That's what God wanted of Shaul, and that's where Shaul failed. Okay, so today we had a discussion about the mitzvah, interesting ideas, I hope, about Nechiyat Amalek and what God really wants. Then we got into the Haftarah and Shaul's failure and why Shaul failed and David Amalek didn't, and the power of Shuvah. And the final 2 points about Shaul wanting Shmuel to come and celebrate the victory and sacrifice in front of the people for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And finally, the beheading of Agag Melech Amalek. Yashar Koach, Shabbat Shalom, and Purim Sameach.